Hey, welcome to I'm Pinky and I'm Not Ashamed. Videos about Americans talking about Australian gun laws have come over my recommended page. So I had a little bit of a look and I've been a bit shocked actually over some of what I've heard.
Thank you for coming. I'm a big fan and I agree with you on most things, but there's one topic that I want to hear you talk more about. My question pertains to firearm policy in the United States versus Australia. Between 1995 and 1996, directly before and after the gun buyback in Australia, there was a 36% drop in deaths caused by gunshot wounds, and that's the sharpest decline in gun-related deaths between 1989 and 2014 in Australia. Between 2001 and 2002, before and after the trafficking handgun agreements in Australia, the general homicide rate, not even specific to firearms, dropped by 17%, which was also the sharpest drop in homicides between 1989 and 2014 in Australia. Comparing Australia to the United States, between 2001 and 2014, there was a 44% decline in the rate of homicides in Australia, compared to only a 19% decline in America. Given these facts, do you believe that policies similar to those enacted in Australia, specifically the gun buyback and the National Firearm Agreement, as well as the trafficking handgun agreements, do you think that similar policies in America would help reduce gun violence?
So I don't think that a gun confiscation policy or a gun buyback program like Australia's would be effective. First of all, important to note that it's unclear how much of the reduction in gun violence in Australia was actually due to the gun buyback. And the reason I say that is because only 1/3 of the guns that were actually bought back were bought back, meaning that 2/3 of the guns remain in circulation in Australia and remain in the homes of the people there. So the gun buyback was not responsible for a 100% reduction of the number of guns in circulation. It was responsible for a 33% reduction in the number of guns in circulation. Second of all, I'd actually want to see the statistics, because you're speaking verbally, I'd like to see the statistics that you're talking about, because the statistics that I have seen is that between 1994, gun homicide rate in the United States was actually about the same as it was in Australia, without us actually engaging in the same policy. And in fact, there's a good article at the Washington Post, the woman's name escapes me. There's a woman who used to work for 538, I think her name was Leah Lebrescu, and she writes an entire piece specifically about the UK and Australia and contrasting their gun policy with the United States and explaining why this is not particularly apt as a comparison. And it isn't. I mean, the fact is that America's homicide rate, our gun violence rate, has gone down massively since 1994, despite the increase of the number of weapons in circulation tremendously during that same period. Right? We've actually increased between 1994 and now from, I think it's 250 million guns in circulation, about 400 million guns in the United States in circulation right now. At the same time, the gun violence rate has declined markedly. Also, when I see these statistics, very often what people tend to do is lump in suicide with homicide. So this is why I'm questioning the stats, just because I have different stats.
I just love how he just pulled those statistics out like they were true. I'm going to have to do some Googling and see where he got his statistics from, because I can assure everybody in America more than 1/3 of Australians gave up their guns. It was massive. Absolutely massive.
Give it to me like...
To then only claim that 100% reduction of deaths, that only 33% of that could be claimed on us losing 33% of guns. Wow. And he's talking to a young lad, and a lot of people get thrown by statistics. I've actually done a video discussing this very thing. You can't just use statistics. They're not exactly scientific. There's a lot of procedures to make sure a statistic is right. Throwing out statistics is wrong. But that politician, and I don't know who he is, literally stood there and lied, and he knows he lied, and he twisted things. Because yes, more than a third of guns were taken off the streets.
If you want to send them to me, I'm happy to have an email exchange about them because I'm curious. I mean, I like more information. But what people tend to do when it comes to this sort of stuff is attribute sharp drops in homicide, which they include sometimes suicide in homicide, to the lack of guns. Well, if you want to shoot yourself, then this actually brings up a general question. Is it my job to remove a gun from you if you want to shoot yourself? I mean, you want to shoot yourself. Like, you could stab yourself, you could hang yourself. And Japan has fairly high suicide rates in certain places. They have virtually no guns in that society. So suicide is something we don't quite understand well on a social science level.
That was really interesting. So he's saying that even without reducing their guns, they've had a reduction in gun violence. Don't want to exaggerate or pull numbers out of my ass, but didn't America have like 200 school shootings in the first 6 months of this year or something ridiculous? I actually think it's very disingenuous of a politician to state that without getting rid of guns, they've had less homicides, and even though Australia have had none. So he's saying that as long as the deaths went down a little bit in that time period, that proves that guns are not the problem. So he's just going to ignore all the other gun deaths, like just ignore them. He's saying the fact that there was a lessening of some deaths in a couple of year frame without them reducing guns, to him that proves that guns aren't the problem. Oh, wow. People who use statistics are really good like that. They can be just twisted into anything. Wow. That was clever. He said that so fast, people wouldn't have even noticed. They'd just be like, oh, yeah, I guess that, yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're right, mate. And I think it's very disingenuous to say that people are going to kill themselves with or without a gun.
You have a gun in your house, you're 80% more likely to use that gun on yourself than to shoot someone else.
He could stand there in front of fellow Americans and say, well, it wouldn't be my job to take a gun off somebody that was going to kill themselves. And there's, you know, everyone's allowed to have a different opinion. I have guns.
There's one argument and one argument alone for having a gun, and this is the argument. Fuck off. I like guns.
I understand why people want to have guns. I like target shooting, but to have a politician stand up there and abuse statistics and ignore the realities and the actual deaths and not care about who's dying from these guns is horrific. Absolutely horrific. I get finding a solution is not necessarily easy. A lot of you guys love your guns, and, you know, I get that. In Australia, we love our beer, and I tell you what, if the government tried to take our beer away, so that's fine that people want to still have guns. But to have a politician that is not going to help you find a solution, don't let those politicians lie to you.